Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive.
Oh, yeah.
This time we're tackling Robert Greene's The Laws of Human Nature.
It's a big one.
It is. It's a fascinating look at, those people that we all encounter, those baffling, sometimes frustrating people,
Wow.
like the toxic narcissist, the drama magnet, the rigid rationalist.
Oh, yeah.
And just as important, I think, how to break bad patterns in our own WN behavior.
Yes.
So get ready for some serious aha moments, I think, as we unpack Greene's insights into self-mastery and influence.
One of the things that I find most fascinating about Greene's approach is how he challenges this assumption that we're rational creatures.
Right.
Like, we all like to think that we make decisions based on logic and reason,
Yeah.
but he argues that so much of our behavior is actually driven by these deep-seated emotions that we often don't even recognize.
It's funny because we all love to think of ourselves as the logical ones, right?
Of course.
But then Greene uses that example of Pericles observing those Athenian politicians. And it just makes you realize how often what seems like rational decision-making is actually fueled by, these hidden desires for power or attention.
Validation.
Even just validation, yeah.
Exactly. Pericles saw right through those seemingly rational debates and all those strategies
Yeah.
to the underlying emotional currents that were really driving the politicians' actions.
Yeah.
And Greene argues that this high-grade irrationality, as he calls it,
Right.
is something we're all susceptible to,
Yeah.
especially when we're under pressure.
Have you ever noticed how, stress can reveal someone's true character?
Oh, absolutely.
It's like all those carefully constructed facades just crumble and you see what they're really made of.
Yeah.
I remember this one time at a previous job, I had this manager who always seemed so calm and collected,
Right.
But during this big presentation, he just completely lost it.
Oh, wow.
It was like watching a different person emerge,
Oh, really?
and it definitely changed my perception of him.
It's a perfect example of how stress can kind of expose those raw emotions
Yeah.
that usually lie hidden beneath the surface.
Yeah.
And it's not just about, the big dramatic moments.
Right.
Greene also talks about these more subtle biases that can warp our thinking,
Yeah.
even in everyday situations.
Mhm.
He calls one of them conviction bias,
Okay.
which is the idea that the more passionately someone argues for something,
Right.
the more likely we are to believe them,
Yeah.
even if their logic is totally flawed.
Oh my gosh, that's totally me.
Right.
I fall for that all the time, especially with salespeople.
Of course. Yeah.
I think it's because I admire their confidence,
Yes.
But now that you mention it, I realize how often I bought things that I didn't really need
Right.
just because the salesperson was so persuasive.
Yes.
So if we're all swimming in this sea of irrationality,
Yeah.
how do we navigate it?
Right.
Greene seems to suggest that empathy is a key skill,
It is.
and not just for understanding others, but for influencing them.
He uses this captivating story of Ernest Shackleton,
Oh, yeah.
the Antarctic explorer.
Mm-hmm.
Shackleton was leading this incredibly harrowing expedition,
Yeah.
and their ship got trapped in the ice.
Oh, wow.
And so he had to keep his crew motivated for months
Right.
in these unbelievably challenging conditions.
Wow. Talk about pressure.
Yeah.
Being stuck in the freezing Antarctic with a bunch of guys who were probably starting to get on each other's nerves.
Yeah.
That's a real test of leadership.
Absolutely. And Shackleton realized that in order to keep his men going,
Yeah.
he had to connect with them on a deeply personal level.
Right.
So he made a point of spending time with each man individually,
Okay.
talking to them about their lives,
Mhm.
their families, their hopes and fears.
Wow.
He really attuned himself to their individual personalities and needs,
Yeah.
which allowed him to tailor his approach to each person.
So instead of just barking orders from on high, he
Mhm.
was meeting them where they were at emotionally. That takes some serious emotional intelligence.
It does.
But doesn't that almost sound manipulative?
Mm,
Like he was using empathy to get what he wanted from them.
that's a really interesting question.
Yeah.
It's true that empathy can be used for manipulative purposes,
Right?
but I think in Shackleton's case, it was more about genuine connection and understanding.
Okay.
He knew that to get his crew to follow him,
Yeah.
he needed to earn their trust and respect.
Right.
And he did that by demonstrating that he cared about them as individuals.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's like he was using empathy to build a real sense of camaraderie,
Exactly.
which was essential for their survival.
Yes. And this leads to another one of Greene's points, which is that we're all essentially actors on a social stage.
Oh, yeah.
We adapt our behavior to different people and situations.
Right.
We put on different masks. to
Yeah,
achieve our goals.
that's so true.
Right.
I'm definitely not the same person at work as
Yeah.
I am with my friends or family. I think we all have these different sides of ourselves that we present to the world depending on who we're with and what we're trying to accomplish.
Right. And Greene isn't suggesting that this is a bad thing.
Right.
It's simply part of human nature to
Yeah.
present different versions of ourselves in different contexts.
Yeah.
The key is being aware of this dynamic
Yeah. Okay.
so that it doesn't control us.
So how do we do that?
Right.
How do we become more aware of these unconscious roles that we're playing?
This is where Greene gets into those fascinating nonverbal cues that we
Okay.
give off.
Yeah.
The whole body language and microexpressions thing.
Okay, good.
Greene points out that we reveal a lot more through our nonverbal communication
Right.
than we often realize.
Mm-hmm.
Our body language,
Mm-hmm.
our tone of voice, even those fleeting microexpressions
Yeah.
can betray our true feelings,
Yeah.
even if we're trying really hard to hide them.
Like when someone says they're fine, but you can totally tell by their tone of voice
Exactly.
that they're actually really annoyed.
Right? Or those subtle tension cues like tightly crossed arms,
yeah.
forced smiles.
The classic eye roll.
The classic eye roll, exactly.
Yeah.
Greene argues that paying attention to these cues
Right.
can give us a much deeper understanding of what's really going on beneath the surface.
And it's not just about becoming a human lie detector, right?
Right.
Greene emphasizes how understanding these cues can help us act accordingly
Yes.
in social situations.
Yeah.
So if you can pick up on those subtle signs of insecurity in someone,
Mm-hmm.
maybe you tread a bit more carefully.
Right.
Or if you're trying to gauge someone's level of interest in what you're saying,
Right.
their body language can be incredibly revealing.
Absolutely. And he even mentioned how some people use nonverbal cues to subtly assert dominance.
Interesting.
For example, someone might start complaining about a headache
Yeah.
or some other ailment as a way of forcing others to cater to their needs
Right.
and inadvertently giving them a sense of control.
That's a bit manipulative, but I can definitely see how that could happen.
Right.
Like if you're always the one who has to take care of everything because your partner is always sick,
Yes.
that can create a real power imbalance in the relationship.
It certainly can.
Yeah.
It certainly can. And speaking of these hidden dynamics, Greene introduces this really intriguing concept of the shadow self.
Yes, the shadow, this is where it gets really juicy, I think.
Right?
For those who haven't encountered this idea before, Greene's talking about that hidden part of our personality
Yeah.
where we bury all those desires and impulses that society tells us are unacceptable.
He argues that we all have a shadow.
Yeah,
And it's often what accounts for those contradictions that we see in people's behavior.
right.
So, for example, the person who's excessively nice on the surface
Right.
might have this hidden aggressive streak,
Oh, yeah.
or someone who's rigidly rational
Mm-hmm.
might be deeply insecure underneath it all.
It's not just about other people, though, right?
Right.
Greene emphasizes the importance of recognizing our own shadow. So what are some signs that we might be, dealing with our own shadow side?
That's a great question. One sign is when we have this really strong negative reaction to someone
Yeah.
who embodies a trait that we're repressing in ourselves.
Okay.
So, for example, if you find yourself intensely irritated by someone who's always bragging,
Right.
it might be because you secretly harbor a desire to be more assertive yourself.
So instead of judging them,
Yeah.
we should maybe ask ourselves, like, what is it about this person that's triggering me?
Exactly. It's about becoming aware of those projections
Right.
and asking ourselves, what part of myself am I denying?
Okay, that's powerful. And Greene also gives us these really vivid archetypes of people with strong shadows, like the rigid rationalist. He describes them as someone who just can't stand anything illogical or emotional,
Right.
often because they're terrified of their own messy feelings.
Yeah, they're afraid of that vulnerability.
And then there's the saint,
Oh, yes.
who's so outwardly moral and righteous that they end up judging everyone around them.
Right.
Greene suggests that this type of person might be masking a secret dark side
Right.
that they're afraid to acknowledge.
It's almost like their shadow is so big
Right.
that it casts a shadow on everyone else.
But seriously, how do we work with this shadow?
Right.
Is it about letting it all hang out and just indulging every impulse?
Not quite. It's not about indulging our darkest impulses,
Right.
but about understanding and integrating those hidden parts of ourselves.
Right.
It's about becoming whole accepting both the light and the shadow within us.
So it's more about bringing those shadow aspects into consciousness where we
Exactly.
can manage them
Right.
instead of them controlling us from the subconscious.
Yes.
Which seems really relevant to what Greene says about desire,
Mhm.
how it drives us,
Yeah.
but also how others can manipulate it.
It's a powerful force, isn't it?
Yeah.
That yearning for something more, something better.
Greene points out that this whole grass is always greener syndrome is
Yes.
part of human nature.
It is.
It's what pushes us to innovate, to create, to strive for more.
Right.
But it can also get us into trouble.
Of course.
I mean, think about that story Greene tells about the South Sea bubble.
Oh, yes.
It's like the original FOMO-driven frenzy.
Absolutely. That's a classic example of how desire can be manipulated.
Right.
John Blunt, the mastermind behind the South Sea Company,
Yeah.
was a genius at tapping into people's fears and desires.
Right.
He created this illusion of scarcity and exclusivity, making people desperate to get in on the action,
Right.
even though the company's value was completely inflated.
It's like those crazy NFT crazes we've seen recently where people were throwing money at digital images
Yes.
without really understanding what they were buying.
Right, just that fear of missing out.
Yeah, the desire to be part of the in crowd and the fear of missing out can be incredibly powerful motivators.
They really can, and Greene's point is that it's often the desire itself,
Right.
not the possession of the thing that
Yeah.
truly drives us.
The chase can be more intoxicating than the catch.
It can.
Thinking back to those false purposes we were discussing earlier, it's like those traps are all based on chasing something
Right.
that never quite satisfies. You get the money, the relationship, the status,
Yeah.
and you're still left feeling empty.
It's like you're always reaching for the next rung on the ladder,
Yeah.
but the ladder never actually ends.
So how do we break free from that cycle?
Right.
Greene talks about this deep human need for purpose.
He does.
But how do we distinguish between a true purpose and a false one?
That's a great question, and I think it's something that a lot of us struggle with.
Yeah.
One clue is that a true purpose usually arises from this deep sense of personal meaning and connection.
Okay.
It's not something that you force, but something that kind of emerges organically
Right.
from your unique talents, interests, and experiences.
So if it feels like you're forcing it or trying to fit into someone else's idea of what you should be doing, it's probably not your true purpose.
Exactly. It's about listening to that inner voice,
Yeah.
that sense of what truly resonates with your soul.
Okay.
And Greene highlights a few common false purposes that can be really tempting,
Yeah.
but ultimately lead to a sense of emptiness.
Right.
For example, the idea that money equals purpose
Right.
is a trap that so many people fall into.
It's easy to see how that happens. We live in a society that often equates success with wealth.
Yeah.
So it's natural to think that if you just make enough money, you'll finally be happy and fulfilled.
But as many people who have achieved great wealth discover,
Right.
money itself doesn't bring lasting happiness.
Then there's the relentless pursuit of the ideal love or relationship.
Right.
I think we've all fallen into that trap at some point, thinking that if we could just find that perfect someone,
Yes.
all our problems would be solved.
It's a very human longing,
Right.
that desire for connection and completion.
Yeah.
But the problem is that we often project our own unmet needs and expectations onto our partners. Yeah. Setting ourselves up for disappointment.
And what about that feeling of needing to belong to a group or cause?
Yes,
It can be so empowering to feel like you're part of something bigger than yourself.
it can.
But as Greene points out, it can also lead to losing our individuality
Right.
and conforming to the group's expectations.
It's a delicate balance.
Yeah.
It's important to find communities and causes that align with our values, but we also need to be mindful of not sacrificing our own authenticity in the process.
And then there's the classic rebel who defines themselves purely by opposition.
Right.
I've definitely known people like that who are always pushing back against authority and convention, but never seem to have a clear sense of what they actually stand for.
It's like their purpose is defined by what they're against,
Right.
not what they're for.
And finally, there's the workaholic who mistakes obsessive focus on their career for a true sense of purpose.
Yes.
I think that's a trap that's especially easy to fall into in today's hustle culture.
It's all too common. We get so caught up in the busyness and achievement
Yeah.
that we lose sight of what really matters.
Okay, so those are some of the traps to watch out for.
Right.
But how do we find that elusive true purpose?
Right.
What are some concrete steps we can take?
Well, Greene offers some really practical advice.
Okay.
He stresses the importance of deep self-awareness,
Yeah.
which is about understanding your own unique talents interests, and values.
That sounds simple enough, but I think it's actually quite challenging.
It is.
In our noisy, distracted world,
Yes.
we're constantly bombarded with messages about what we should be doing, who we should be,
Right.
that it can be hard to connect with our own inner compass.
It definitely takes effort, but it's essential for finding a path that truly aligns with who you are.
Okay.
One strategy Greene recommends is to think back to your childhood.
Oh, yeah.
What were you passionate about as a kid before all those societal expectations started to shape your choices?
Huh. That's a great idea. I used to love writing stories and putting on plays when I was a kid.
There you go.
Maybe that's a clue to what my true purpose is.
Maybe it is.
But what about someone like Coco Chanel? I mean, she came from a really disadvantaged background,
Yeah.
and yet she achieved incredible success. How did she find her purpose?
She's a great example of someone who defied the odds and followed her own path.
Yeah.
Greene highlights the importance of finding mentors to guide and support you on your journey.
Mm-hmm.
Chanel, for example, had a series of mentors
Okay.
who helped her navigate the business world.
So having mentors can be a game changer.
They can be.
It's about finding those people who believe in you,
Yes.
who can offer guidance and support when you need it.
Absolutely.
But even with great mentors, staying focused can be a challenge.
Oh, it's so hard.
Greene also emphasizes the importance of sustained focus.
Yes.
Especially in today's world where there are so many distractions competing for our attention.
He talks about the hyperintention effect.
Okay.
The idea that the harder we try to force something, the less likely we are to achieve it.
Interesting.
Sometimes we need to relax our grip a bit and trust the process.
It's like that saying, what we resist persists. If
Exactly.
we can let go of that need to control everything, maybe things will flow more naturally.
I think so.
But to find that true purpose, to really understand ourselves and the people around us, don't we need to become better observers?
Absolutely. Greene argues that deep observation is a crucial skill,
Yeah,
but one that's becoming increasingly rare in our distracted, fast-paced world.
it's true.
He talks about how our brains are wired to focus on what's immediately stimulating
Right.
and to tune out everything else.
Which makes sense, right?
It does.
From an evolutionary standpoint, it was crucial to be able to spot danger or opportunity
Right.
in our immediate surroundings.
Exactly.
But now we're constantly bombarded with information and stimulation. So it's easy to get caught up in the superficial and miss those deeper meanings.
And this is where we can learn from people who were masters of observation.
Okay.
Greene points to Martin Luther King Jr. as a prime example.
Okay.
He describes how MLK developed this incredible sensitivity to the nuances of human behavior,
Yeah.
which allowed him to connect with people on such a deep level
Right.
and understand those subtle dynamics of power and oppression.
It's like he could see through the surface to the heart of the matter.
He could.
But you don't have to be a social justice leader to benefit from deep observation.
Of course not.
Greene also talks about how we can learn from artists and writers
Right.
who were known for their keen powers of perception.
Like who?
He mentions Anton Chekhov, the Russian playwright,
Yeah.
and short story writer who was famous for creating incredibly realistic characters.
Chekhov had this amazing ability to observe the seemingly mundane details of everyday life.
Right.
And to use those observations to illuminate the complexities of the human condition.
Yeah.
His characters feel so real, so relatable, because they're based on this deep understanding of human nature.
And then there's Flannery O'Connor,
Oh, yes.
the Southern Gothic writer who had this uncanny knack for capturing the quirks and eccentricities of the people that she encountered in her rural Georgia community.
O'Connor's stories are full of these strange and wonderful characters who might seem grotesque or even disturbing on the surface,
Right.
but ultimately reveal something really profound about our shared humanity.
So both Chekhov and O'Connor show us that deep observation is not just about seeing what's there.
No.
It's about understanding the meaning behind it.
Right.
It's about connecting the dots and seeing the bigger picture.
And that brings us to another fascinating point that Greene makes.
Okay.
The importance of understanding the cycles of history.
Oh, yeah.
He argues that by observing how historical patterns repeat themselves,
Right.
we can better navigate the present and even anticipate the future.
It's like that saying, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it.
Exactly.
But Greene takes it a step further,
He does.
suggesting that we can actually use history as a guide
Right.
to understanding the present and even predicting the future.
He talks about how each generation tends to rebel against the previous one.
Right.
creating this cyclical dynamic where certain values and trends come back around in new forms.
Interesting.
It's fascinating to see how this plays out in culture, fashion, even politics.
It's like we're all part of this grand historical dance.
We are.
And if we can learn the steps,
Yeah,
we can move more gracefully through it.
I love that analogy.
Think about the parallels between the Roaring '20s, the freewheeling '60s, and the youth culture of today.
Right?
There are definite echoes of those earlier eras
Yeah.
in how young people are pushing boundaries and challenging the status quo.
It's a reminder that while the details might change,
Yeah.
those underlying human drives and motivations
Right.
remain remarkably consistent over time.
So how can we become better archaeologists of our own time?
Right.
How can we develop that deeper understanding of the forces that are shaping our world?
Greene encourages us to pay attention to the cultural artifacts of our time.
Okay.
The music, the movies,
Yeah.
the books, the social media trends,
Right.
and to ask ourselves what they reveal about our values, our fears, our aspirations.
Yeah.
What makes our generation unique?
Right.
What are the patterns and trends that define us?
It's about becoming more conscious of how we're being influenced by our surroundings.
Yes.
And making more deliberate choices about how we want to live our lives.
Absolutely.
But all of this brings us back to that central question that Greene raises.
Okay.
If our character is essentially stamped into us from an early age,
Right.
how much can we really change?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is.
Are we ultimately masters of our fate,
Yeah.
or are we just playing out roles that were predetermined?
And I don't think there's an easy answer,
I don't either.
but maybe that's the point.
Maybe it is.
Greene's book gives us this framework for understanding human nature,
It does.
but it also leaves us with more questions than answers.
Right.
And that's a good thing.
I think so.
It means we're still curious, still exploring,
Yes.
still trying to figure out this whole human thing.
If you're interested in continuing to explore these ideas, I highly recommend checking out The Laws of Human Nature for yourself.
Absolutely.
It's a dense read,
Yeah.
but it's packed with insights that will stay with you long after you finish the last page.
I couldn't agree more. It's one of those books that makes you see yourself and the world in a whole new light.
I think so.
Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the fascinating and often baffling world of human nature.
It's been a pleasure.
Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.